lots of conversations about tech on the global stage, and how do we enable countries that may not have built their tech ecosystem to the same level, but still need to engage in those conversations, have a voice at the table, so there's not going to be a digital divide on the governance level. So lots of interesting ways that it's all intersects. Over 3 billion people to come onto the internet, which is something that we don't think about often. And that opens lots of questions in the question of, is the internet resilient enough to be able to absorb another 3 billion people using the kind of applications that evolve? I went onto ChatGPT and I'm sort of about to launch into the oh my God, you can't use ChatGPT to write your thing. You know, it's not reliable. You know, it's not give the whole ChatGPT risks talk. I mean, it's bad enough now you have to talk about the birds and the bees. You have to sit down and talk about the AI risk talk.
Don't know which is what.
But I think that's the key to it. I think the power of tech to be good for everybody, from the micro to the macro, but so that it allows us to be better humans.
Melanie, thank you so much for joining us today, and really excited to hear all about you. So if you can just start by telling us about yourself and your organisation.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm Dr. Melanie Garson. I'm the Cyber Policy Lead and the Acting Director of Geopolitics at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change.
Amazing.
The Institute operates in about 34 countries worldwide. We are about 800 people, and we really work at the intersection of helping leadership build their 21st century strategic state, with really tech as an enabler to that.
Yeah, nice. I didn't realize it was 800 people. That's crazy. That's massive.
It is a massive. I wish I had a camera every time I say that to people, because I have the same reaction. I could have a whole wall of people that have the same reaction. But yeah, we're lucky to be growing. So we stretch now from Indonesia on one side until the Bahamas on the other side, or a lot of concentration in Africa, but really go wherever we're needed.
Amazing. And has it grown sort of size-wise and across quite a lot in the last few years, or has it been more steady growth? Or
no, it's been a rapid growth since the organisation had previous iterations that came out of when Tony Blair left office, and he had several interests, particularly with Africa and countering violent extremism, and also the Middle East, and was engaged with different organisations on those fronts, but then also was watching how tech was shifting how to deliver good leadership outcomes. So brought the organisations together. Difficult having 3 teenagers in different households as each organisation was growing, so brought them all together under one roof, but really with looking at delivering these really large objectives of enabling leadership to be able to build their governments better, to be able to deliver within their own countries better on their ambitions, and how to really build that, even help in the leapfrogging to avoid many of the mistakes that perhaps we've made along the way, to be able to fully participate as, in this rapid growth and sort of exponential sort of technological revolution alongside it. So with that in mind, so since they amalgamated all the organisation together, then it's seen a big growth point, both on we have policy teams, so policy and politics teams, we have our country teams on the ground, our delivery, what's our global client solutions, we call it, and then our partnerships team. So really, we all work together to help bring both thinking and practice. So it's not like a think tank that just thinks, it's a think tank that can then enable putting these into practice, but that is very much informed by understanding what's needed on the ground. So it's not just imposing our thinking, but helping, what goes on the ground grow our thinking at the same time to really build those solutions that can be implemented.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so it's more sort of empowering rather than like, here is a solution that worked for us, however long ago. It must be absolutely fascinating. It must. You've got a bit of a lag.
I think so.
It must be fascinating because the sort of geopolitical space is always obviously evolving, and the technical space is always evolving. So it must feel like nothing is ever standing still, because solutions that are viable and seem like a great idea 1 year, the tech will advance so much within a year, and then the sort of the geopolitical space as well. So you must feel like you're kind of never standing still. There's never like, oh, we've got a quiet period, or we've solved this problem now. Like, it must be full on.
Well, it's never ever quiet. That is absolutely for sure. I think, though, it is identified. So there's a danger sometimes on the kind of running too fast and trying to break things, sort of the move fast and break things philosophy sometimes, because we're trying to look at solutions. We're also trying to look at how you put those solutions into the long term. So I think whilst things are constantly evolving, it's really important to kind of take that breath and be able to really understand an ecosystem, which is what our country teams are able to do really, really well. They're able to have those conversations, really understand an ecosystem, and then make sure that the solutions are bespoke to that particular ecosystem, but based on all the best practices you can take from other places as well. So there is an art, I suppose, to taking a pause whilst everything else is moving around you so fast, and then to be able to think about the solution that will then enable that country or that locale to move even faster or keep up with the pace, because you've taken that little bit of a pause to get it right.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be a lot of sort of that systems thinking thing of zooming out and just looking at it, and not the problem that you're solving now, the solution not causing the next problem, which is kind of common when you don't take that pause.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. Because really at the heart of what we're trying to do is sort of drive change, and it's sort of taking the ideas, make them into reality. And by having like all our different rings, strategy and policy and delivery, and thinking about what we can unlock, so that it's really about building these open, inclusive spaces and prosperous societies for everybody. And you have to have that complete optics to be able to do it.
Nice. So you lead a team there. So what does your team kind of specifically do in that ecosystem?
So my team works with two elements. So we have deep regional expertise and geopolitical insights that really help us understand the relationships that countries are having to navigate, both between each other. So whether we're thinking of engaging in those countries, or those countries, the impact of those countries' engagement in other spaces. How we also think about, because our headquarters and part of our work is also Britain's role in all this. So thinking about how the UK, particularly in the post-Brexit order, navigates its own foreign policy, particularly sitting between the big powers. And so if we take the big powers and we overlay that with the big issues of things like where the tech and these sort of access to semiconductors, so the geoeconomics part of that sits in that. So where does Britain navigate its position, both as a convener in this space, where can it add to its value? And so we work with that. And also we do a lot of work on what I call tech geopolitics. So that's really at the intersection of understanding whether that's how particular tech is reshaping geopolitics, or how whether we use that tech is reshaping geopolitics. So whether it's thinking about whether certain tech becomes a tool or part of a tech ecosystem becomes a tool in our geopolitics. So thinking things like cyber warfare and building like resilience to that, or also thinking about how our communications infrastructure and the internet, everything that enables our economic prosperity, how do we create resilience for that? So things like that. Are we seeing new geopolitical actors where we think about where tech companies have tremendous power throughout the ecosystem? How are they sitting within the balance of power of what we look at? We've seen that particularly because, we combine this all together. This is the beauty of the team that I lead, and why I love it is that we do thinking about Russia, Ukraine, for instance, and, what's the realities on the ground there. But then we also think about, okay, well, where have we seen differences in this from other conflicts? And the tech component of that has been a really interesting feature of how it's changed it from other conflicts that we know. So marrying all that together, we also think about what do today's diplomats need to know. So what I call tech forward foreign policy, about engaging in the world today, that where you've got lots of conversations about tech on the global stage, and how do we enable countries that may not have built their tech ecosystem to the same level, but still need to engage in those conversations, have a voice at the table, so there's not going to be a digital divide on the governance level. So lots of interesting ways that it all intersects.
Yeah, God, it sounds absolutely fascinating. I have about 1 million questions, because it must just be like you said, about the sort of power imbalance and that divide, and the sort of the tech literacy and all the inherent biases that come with like the new tech, that, particularly around data, anything that's sort of producing data or anything like that, all of those sort of inherent biases, and how those biases are kind of taking effect in the UK, but then how they take effect in other countries that have a different landscape. It must just be, it must be absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it's really interesting navigating those spaces, because many of those countries will have an opportunity to leapfrog into a different space than other countries have had to involve with. But it's making sure that there is still the opportunity to do that. We don't forget that there's still over 3 billion people to come onto the internet, which is something that we don't think about often. And that opens a lots of questions, in the question of, is the internet resilient enough to be able to absorb another 3 billion people using the kind of applications that evolve? Now, if you think about the amount of like the 2.5 quintillion bits of data that are produced at the moment, like how that's going to take effect. Are countries equipped for that? Or are countries equipped to take advantage of that? Are we making sure that those people are going to be able to do that? How do we support that, at every level? And make sure that it's not also reinforcing negative externalities. So, for instance, what I often call myself the bad cyber fairy. So we work with countries and incredible vision of change, and they absolutely have this incredible vision of change, and everybody wants to build the latest tool. They want massive power in having health insights, to be able to build your health ecosystem better. But if that fundamental infrastructure is a little bit leaky, it's not secure. So, thinking about where we build cyber capacity, cyber resilience at the same time, you could be creating more problems. So it's really working with leadership to make sure that as this gets rolled out, as we absorb all these people, as we close this digital divide, we do so really safely and securely, and make sure it's absolutely beneficial and not creating more exposure to risk.
Yeah, I can imagine that's quite the responsibility. There must be some moments of that kind of analysis paralysis where there must be so much that could go wrong, I guess. It's kind of making the decisions to actually move forward with things, but it's mitigated risk, I guess. Okay, so you mentioned about you have sort of the different areas, and you talked about providing insight sort of around for policy change. Are there any kind of particular success stories for you personally? Is there anything that stands out in terms of sort of wins that your team have had around policy, or anything else that you guys have implemented?
Well, across, I mean, and I also, because we work so interactively with our, with different parts of the
Yeah.
institute, and where they said really working to make sure that policy creates a rationale for what other parts of the institute do. And the institute has had some, really great movements forward. So when we think about infrastructure resilience, so we just talked
Mhm.
about the power of the internet. Now, if that internet goes out, like by,
Yeah.
excuse me, let me do that again. So if that internet goes out, whether it's by design through a foreign adversary taking it out. So one of the big things that we wrote about a lot at the beginning of Ukraine was how tech companies stepped in to be able to
Mm.
keep the communications infrastructure going. This materially affected Russia's balance of power. Ability to act in the war. It's like, and Starlink was a big game changer for that. But recently, we've seen other situations where the infrastructure goes out. We have hurricanes, or the infrastructure is not just there. So across the institute,
Yeah.
we helped convene a partnership between the government in Malawi and Starlink to get people back online after the hurricane had wiped out a lot of
Wow.
the infrastructure. We've just connected or helped connect the 50th school in Rwanda to the internet via Starlink. So creating these partnerships and bringing people together, so being able to identify the problem, identify who are the partners in the solution, and really making that happen. And that comes from, really across the institute and bringing that together on different levels. When our AI, people that work in AI team, we have a great bespoke toolkit, but to help countries think about how they begin to get on their AI journey, working with countries in Africa on that. But also by the same token, that led for us last year convening the first Pan-African Women in AI conference, which brought together
Wow.
200 women from across the continent for the first time to actually sit and think about, we talk about diversity in AI and bringing in those voices and
Yeah.
bringing
Yeah.
in that regional continent power and doing things like that. So I think those are the things that I think are enormous wins for what we seek to do and to sort of lay the foundations of the work that we do in all different places.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. I think I'm probably going to say absolutely amazing, absolutely incredible, and super interesting a lot throughout this, so maybe we can get a decent edit on it. Okay, and can you give some examples of how the organization uses tech? So you mentioned about AI there, just any kind of, on the technical side, any kind of new interesting stuff you guys are doing, or the main thing that you use in tech?
Well,
There was one.
on we do a lot of thinking, and we really of where tech enables. Sorry, we do a lot of thinking of where tech really enables delivery of the solutions that we're finding, and both on the policy thinking of what this should look like and how countries need to build their ecosystem into doing this. So things like, how do you build an ecosystem for digital governance? And we know that like digital ID and digital government is going to help, align, cut out the bureaucracy, cut out the obstacles for delivery on many, many, many issues. England is still not great on this yet. We've been putting like digital ID on this. Whereas if you look at a country like Ukraine, even under attack, right? They were able to, once they'd been able to transfer all the data out of country to make sure it was safe from attack or
Yeah.
capture, um, they've been able to keep on delivering benefits payments or be able to have that tracking with their citizens, even those that have had to leave the country. So
Mm.
it's a hugely enabling architecture. So we work with helping build these enabling architectures, thinking about where the solution spaces exist for countries that are building this, are very much thinking about preventative medicine, for instance. What is the role of
Okay.
wearables? What is the role of like thinking about what do hospitals look like if you don't always, if you can provide X amount of treatment or even prevent the need for treatment from tech solutions out
Yeah.
of those spaces. So it's really think about where it can be embedded in all sorts of spaces. We've helped advise on setting up e-visa systems, on, really
Yeah.
looking at what's the challenge and where can we help bring in the partnerships for connectivity and for solutions oriented thinking.
So I don't know if you'll be able to talk about this, but what's the process that you go through to decide what challenge to solve and what area to look at? Because I mean, sort of listing stuff off there must be, infinite
Oh,
challenges in infinite places. How do you make that decision on what to work on?
uh, some of it is by being on in country and sort of, with having those discussions with the government on what are very specifically the challenges in those places. So there's not
Yeah.
two things, but also being able to draw best practice. And this is how we think with the policy thinking is very much driven by, yes, blue sky and visionary, but it's got to be practical,
Yeah.
implementable blue sky visionary. And even though it's getting those building blocks that countries get onto. So it's building for 2030 or building for 2050, but building that today and thinking of what the
Mm.
sequencing of that can be. So it can be demand led. It can also be from the fortunate element of having a former leader as the head of the organization and as the real
Yeah.
vision behind a lot of what we do, is having that deep expertise of how difficult it is to get things done sometimes in government, and being able to identify the areas of what would have made things easier of getting things done in government, and really
Yeah.
understand that tech and being able to say, actually, this is a key enabler of you, leader, whoever you are, in trying to build this open, prosperous, conclusive society.
Yeah. Yeah.
This bit is going to be a huge part of getting you where you need to go. So whether that your startup ecosystem, or whether that like cutting out the bureaucracy, creating digital ID, whether that making
Mm.
sure you close that last 10% on your infrastructure and it's sort of getting everybody online, whether it's skills in school or digital skills in school. That's one of the parts of where we have that sort of action and interaction between leadership that we have, or that kind of vision, the leadership we talk to on the ground, and the tremendous team of amazingly bright policy minds who also have come from really varied backgrounds. Some of them have
Mm.
also been inside government themselves. And
Yeah.
that's also for our teams on the ground. So we often have people who have previously been inside government in those places. So kind of understand really the deep challenges that are being faced. But also in our wider policy team, they're very much not academic, ivory tower kind of policy teams, but people that have had practice in government, practice in industry, practice sometimes in foreign policy, so really amazingly, incredibly smart people that I learn from each day as
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
as, they put their learning into their work.
Amazing. I guess it's like what you mentioned earlier about bringing the think tank piece with the actual practicality. So that there is that tendency with the academic world to sort of, sometimes it's easy to say, oh, well, they're just kind of talking a lot and not actually doing anything. And I'm sure it's much more than that. But yeah, I think that's really great. And I guess, yeah, for having Tony Blair, he's got a bit of experience in this kind of thing. So, so it's a good one to have on your CV. So, and in terms of your background, so you were in the academic world for a long time, and you still teach. I had a look in your course at cyber warfare. Hang on, I've got it in my
It does
notes. Cyber
from
warfare
cyber,
to robots.
yeah, it's gone from cyber warfare to robots, to future conflict in the digital age. Yes, I still teach that, and I still teach international negotiation at
Yeah.
UCL, and I'm really fortunate that I'm able to do a bit of both, because both inform the other. So one is,
Yeah, of course.
sometimes doing the thinking of what I'm doing practically, and
Yeah.
I think for students it's really beneficial to sometimes get the practical lens on what's, can be
Yeah.
sometimes seem academic. So it's never academic; it's also practical. So yeah, my background's been really varied. So I started off. Really in the field of international conflict resolution and international security, and took and particularly thinking about how we increase grassroots cooperation. And a long time ago, sort of began to intersect with tech as part of that. So one of the very early kind of grassroots reconciliation projects I was working on was setting up joint tech incubators
Okay.
between parties from opposite sides of a conflict line, where you can find sometimes tech as a common language that sort of
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
was overriding the ideological divide, if you want, so the
Yeah.
in particular context. And that was really understanding the role of sort of innovation in ecosystems where it can draw people together. I also took a little bit of a side swipe and spent some time actually in the legal world, and
Casual. As you do.
as you do, I'm working a lot on some of the larger on sort of international disputes, and then thinking about, and that was very much was driven by actually coming from a background of um, basically problem solving dispute resolution. That was a real gap as more alternative dispute resolution techniques were being considered within the legal system in the UK, but working on that. And then sort of jumped into the academic sphere to be able to, partly driven by um, sort of personal work-life balance of
Sure.
having small children, and sort of, but also wanting to sort of redirect a little bit, and it was there when I sort of was re-engaging back with international security and international relations, and suddenly noticing how tech was beginning to reshape what we knew. And like way back in my graduate studies, I'd done a sort of minor in innovation systems and how the internet, and was beginning to think about like reshape at that point quite an economics focus.
Okay.
But for what I was beginning to track was things are being skewed here. What we know isn't quite what we know anymore. And what started as like a bullet point on a final slide in a course became like a slide in a lecture, to a lecture in a course, to a point where I lobbied the department saying, you know what, I need to teach a whole course on this because this is too powerful
Yeah.
to be. And by this point, I'd become very obsessed with cyber and cybersecurity, and sort of doing various training and to understand what it was that was going on in the field, and then thinking about how that interacts with the world, which is, and then looking at that right now when a lot of people say to me, well, you've got to advise one person about the key thing in geopolitics today, and I sometimes feel a bit like a broken record, because then I look around and I think, wow, there's so many things I can talk about. Like US, China, I could have, like, where's India going to sit? Or I can think about, what sort of things, like what's going to be. And I still come back to it again and again and again, that we're so reliant now on the internet for
Yeah.
everything that we do, for and COVID accelerated that. And it's just become, from your mom and pop businesses that are now operated on Instagram. Instagram goes out to the day, in any given country there's a massive economic hit, because so many countries, between Etsy or Instagram, whatever, are operating their businesses now through these models, that the economic cost of not having connectivity for a day, whether that's through, as I say, a massive climactic event, or through a cyber attack, there's something that's
Yeah.
directed and targeted, is so massive that I still come back to that. Actually, global stability for me, or national stability or national resilience, now depends on really making sure that your connectivity is safe, secure, interoperable, fit for power persons. it's like running water. We assume it's going to be there, so it's
Yeah,
not.
and it's such a visceral reaction when it does go down, and minutes is completely unacceptable now. If something goes down
Yeah.
for moments, it's
I mean,
outrageous.
how frustrated are you when you're watching Netflix and it suddenly
It
starts
buffers.
spinning on you in the middle? Yeah.
How dare it
Buffering.
buffer?
I know
Yeah,
buffering in the middle of my show, but that's, and that's usually momentary, and it feels, and the amount of times you turn on and switch off the TV and turn it on and turn it off,
yeah,
like it's going to make it better any quicker. But you magnify that
well,
on
yeah,
any kind of, take it as a region or a space or whatever, and and the fact that this can become a plane of warfare and be or whether that is by criminality or state sanctioned cyber criminality or active state warfare,
yeah.
is a huge amount to protect on across, and it's almost, when you begin to imagine the sort of surface that you need to protect, it becomes a little bit overwhelming. So don't think
Yeah.
about it too much. But
Yeah.
it's so that to me is the thing that I still find intriguing, never-ending, very exciting, but in a way, it is more manageable than we assume it's going to be.
Okay, that's reassuring. That was sort of building up my 3 a.m. terror thoughts there. But yeah, I mean, it must, for you, obviously having that knowledge, it must be, yeah, kind of scary, but I guess reassuring at the same time. Kind of, it's that a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, I guess, just sort of hearing a little bit. But you
I
have all
mean,
the knowledge, so.
well, that is, and the practitioners and have a lot of sleepless nights, and it's not, it's like
Yeah,
anything. It's like, you're keeping this living, breathing, ever-growing entity like
yeah,
safe, and you've got to be, and thinking about how do you do that.
yeah.
It's a huge endeavor, and there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people across the globe working on it, millions probably, and it's still not enough actually. So it's
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I
we'll get
can't
there.
even. Yeah, it'll be fine, right? Yeah, I can't even imagine. I mean, on a much smaller scale, we're obviously a software company. We run, and we're lucky enough to work with big sort of not-for-profit organizations, and we're an AWS house, so we use all of AWS. And I remember last Christmas, AWS, like one of their regions blipped for moments or something, and it was just carnage. Like everything, on developer Twitter, which is a dangerous place to go. But kind of, if AWS goes down, it's like it's the end of the world, because so much of the world's infrastructure runs on AWS. And then when you think about that power balance, that is, Jeff Bezos just kind of having that. I mean, not him individually, but to an extent, him just having that power.
And actually, you'll be surprised. It's not always such big companies. There's like much smaller companies like Fastly, Cloudflare, what we call it, the content distribution network layer, that are much smaller but have a disproportionate impact. If they go out, it can be felt across thousands of companies, like for hours on end. Like,
and I guess if they're that much. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say it's a massive impact that it can have, and we don't always fully understand, or as we log in every day, the sort of multiple layers, who's playing those layers, and how it's a very delicate balance. And actually, and this is where I get back into the geopolitics, there's a whole bunch of standards and protocols that exist behind that. Some of them that exist on a multi-stakeholder model, some of them that are being fought out quite heavily behind the scenes in different UN agencies, that can completely change the quality of the internet that we use and the interoperability of that internet. So it's quite a complex, undertaking behind the iceberg geopolitically that people don't go on, and it can turn on a penny.
Yeah.
And a good example of that, I guess, for instance, was when, with the Russian-Ukraine war kicking off, there was a big call for people to say, cut .ru off the internet. They wanted to react by, and there were multiple calls. And actually, the internet governance organizations themselves who are multi-stakeholder organizations and non-governmental, they work with, actually said no. They said,
Yeah.
The principle is a free, open, universal, interoperable internet for everybody.
Yeah.
We don't cut a country off because of its geopolitical action at the moment. First of all, because people have, if you think about access to the internet, it's a universal right to accruing to people, not to a state.
Yeah.
Like, we can prevent certain websites. We can cut certain government websites. We can cut certain military websites. We can have action to prevent disinformation, misinformation. We're not going to cut whole countries' people off the internet.
Well, yeah, because it's the individuals that will suffer who don't necessarily support the actions, and it feels too blunt a tool to do. It's obviously high impact, but it's not necessarily just on the people you want. There's too much like cannon fodder, I guess, in that situation. And what a slippery slope as well to say, okay, we're going to cut off this entire state because of this thing that we happen to think is bad and obviously not great, but where does that then end? At what point? And who gets to decide, oh well, actually I disagree with that country's actions, so we should cut them off? And that's a terrifying thought of who gets to make these decisions. So it's reassuring to know.
Well, it is reassuring, except the less reassuring is that actually that multi-stakeholder model that acted in that position is actually at risk. And there's people that don't like that multi-stakeholder model and don't want to cut it down or want to cut down its power, whatever. So the complexity around that is actually really interesting.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. If there's something we can lobby to help keep that going, that sounds like something that probably shouldn't disappear. Maybe we can put those in the notes. But amazing. So yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, it must be just because it's constantly evolving, so that on both sides, so it must just it sounds fascinating. I don't know how much I would sleep if I worked in your job, but I think it sounds absolutely fascinating.
You do, because you're tired from it all.
I bet actually, just exhausted. And it must, I mean, again, on a much, much smaller scale. But so we are ISO 27001 accredited and all the rest of it. And once you start learning about security, it does make you kind of like obviously very aware of it. And it's hard not to tip into sort of tinfoil hat territory. But for you in the site working in that cyberspace, does it have kind of any impact on how you go about your sort of day to day, or like it must be quite hard not to let that.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, I don't like scanning QR codes. That's a big no for me.
Okay. Noted. Okay, I won't do that anymore.
Don't send me these QR codes. It can go too far sometimes though, because I remember getting, so this is kind of funny story, because I got, just after Brexit or whatever sort of things began to evolve, you had to start paying taxes on various things if you ordered from whatever shop, but you didn't realize whether I ordered from, I think it was Subdued or one of those that actually came in from Italy or something. And I then got like a letter or something that said, you've not paid the custom duties on this. You need to go to this website. And I might have come through as a text first. And like, you need to go to this website and pay the customs duties. And I'm like, oh my God, that's totally a scam. Like, no, I'm not going to that website. I just kept deleting all these things until eventually I get like this red notice through the mail.
Oh, wow.
So they're like going to send the bailiffs around. And it was for like £6.84 or something. I mean, you're hardly talking like, but because I've been like so obsessed of like, I'm not clicking on the link for any
so conditioned.
Like, I'm about to like have my TV taken away.
I'm not clicking the link, guys.
I'm not clicking the link, guys. I did have to write to them, and it was like, and there are ways to check whether, verify whether a link was whatever, but you just so in my world, it's like everybody's out to scam me. So I'm not going to do this, but
of course,
so it can go a little too far. I think I do I'm very aware of things. I'm very aware of, particularly social media impacts. I think anyone raising kids, is, and thinking about, and that's less of a, it's looking more widely at what is the exposure to internet use and correct human machine teaming in this world.
Yeah. Yeah, because you mentioned you've got teenage daughters. I've got a 7-year-old son. The idea of what the internet might look like in 5-10 years is, as someone that works in tech, super interesting and loads of possibility, and it could be amazing. But I think as a parent, it's a much more visceral kind of, oh my God, what are you going to be doing in 5 or 10 years? But yeah, again, I can imagine in your role that there's probably a few conversations that go on at home around button clicking and things that you're signing up for and all sorts. Yeah,
absolutely.
Amazing.
But then we learn great stuff. Go on.
No, go on. Sorry, so you learn what from your daughters, and I mean from.
Well, it's really interesting because, and this is a story I've called a couple of times recently, is that all the conversations around now is generative AI, like generative AI,
Yeah.
like we've got it coming out of our ears, and everybody's sort of like, right, what are the skills we're going to need to teach people how to do them? And I sat in Tech UK, there was a panel, and I forget who was on the panel, and he was like, I'm going to go to university and then ask, are you training prompt engineers? Which is so not the right question to be asking any university, anybody. But then I realized that you're already behind the curve, because around a week beforehand, I'd been, it's been exam week, and one of my daughters had exams. Well, they both had exams. I want to come in, and she's like notoriously like shortcuts to things, if that ever. And she comes up to me and goes, Mummy, like, have you ever heard of ChatGPT? I was like, first of all, like, do you listen to what I do for a job?
No, this is brand new information. Educate me.
Have you ever heard about, like, you clearly don't listen to what I say. So she was like, yeah, well, I was revising, and I went on to ChatGPT, and I'm sort of about to launch into the like, oh my God, you can't use ChatGPT to write your thing. It's not reliable. It's not even like give the whole like ChatGPT risks like talk. I mean, it's like bad enough now you have to talk about the birds and the bees. You have to sit down and talk about like the AI risks talk.
Don't know which is worse.
Oh my God. It's quite frankly, they're easily fraught. And then it's like, I just say, no, of course I know that. Everybody knows that. Like, nobody would do their right mind would use it for that. It's like, no, I went to ChatGPT and asked it to generate for me every possible exam question I could ever be asked on this topic. And I went away, and I practiced all the answers to all those questions. So we didn't even ask it she didn't want them to even generate the answers.
I mean,
no, because she knew she couldn't rely on the answers, but she wanted just the tool to think out, are there questions on this topic I've not thought of that I can practice?
Wow.
And that is where but that's where the art of where tech and human, like the magic, and that's what it's supposed to be for. How to use this tool to make what we do better. So sometimes actually, and I've told this story to a couple of people are like, wow, I would have never thought that.
No,
and that's when they sort of excuse me, people that integrate tech into their lives, it's so quickly and so fast, but in a really beneficial way. And sometimes you have to kind of allow that to also happen. So I guess actually it's a really good example of the regulation innovation question. If I'd regulated, if you want, and sort of said, no ChatGPT allowed.
Yeah.
Actually, I would have taken away a key lever of that really had driven her innovation and actually potentially enabled success. So it's really thinking about how do you create regulation that creates boundaries.
Yeah, I really like that.
Use for it to be its best.
Yeah, I love that regulation versus innovation. We talk about the fact that tech is agnostic; it doesn't care how it's used, but obviously you can use it for good or for bad. But yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, that is absolutely incredible that your daughter came up with that. That is a screamingly intelligent girl that you've got there. That's extremely impressive.
Or screamingly lazy, however you look at it.
I mean, same, right? Like, it's working smarter, not harder. I got a lot of time for that. Oh, man. Yeah, I mean, when I was at school, it was, don't use Wikipedia. For God's sake, don't use Wikipedia. But yeah, it's definitely moved on. Amazing. So, and then just our kind of last question for you. So in the industry, can you give us any examples that you've seen that kind of stand out to you of how tech's being used for good or for interesting, if not for good necessarily?
I think, I mean, there's so many areas, and I think there's so many ways that you can enable incredible changes in people's lives, both macro and micro levels. So on one level, I mean, I have a big thing about drones actually, and I love like UAVs and where they get such a bad rap of like thinking about okay they're used as killing machines or whatever, where you hear that something a number of times, but the amount of times that look at organizations like Drones for Good in places where they're being used to deliver medical supplies where they can't be reached, where they're used for search and rescue, where they can be used for putting out fires, where they can literally putting out fires, where they can be used to get to hard to reach places to collect data, where they can even be used to provide internet connectivity, where you can't get that connectivity. Sorry. And I think so, those are really underrated. Now, of course, we have to think about how we secure them and what they're gathering, whatever. But I think there's so many unique ways that people can think out of the box with a tool that can be really enabling. I think, but for the most part, tech that is really life-changing is usually the ones that is like the smaller things that we really take like forget about and that really fall under the radar. So whether that can be apps so there's a great app was created called Peace Fem that was about connecting women mediators across conflict zones because they can exchange best practices. Like mediation is one area where women are notoriously not representative, can have a massive impact on the process. So things that can be quite micro but can be quite huge in how they do that, in safe sharing of domestic abuse, being able to create a support. There's going to be a whole area of, and I think it's very interesting because right now, you hear about, particularly in the AI revolution and things about the robotics and where the change is going to be made for people that may not, whether that's in artificial limbs or whether that's, that level, that is so much of the same technology, whether it's the data that can be used for predicting climate disasters, whether it's going to be to roll out the warning systems, whether all those things, so many layers of change that can be brought in, and like to name them all is it's always thinking about how you can use this tech to be an enabler, but really that kind of micro level changes that can make huge differences in people's lives, what that's just enabled to free up time. And I think I found Kai-Fu Lee, who wrote was one of the very early sort of big players in AI, and he wrote this book like AI Superpowers. He's written that book AI 2040. It's really cool about looking at different stories, narratives to think about different elements of the AI. And we often think about humans being replaced by robots and what they're going to do things. And he writes a great article about somebody came to him and asked about, I've got an old grandmother, whatever, can we create a robot that can go and like keep a company and do that? And he was like, yeah, we could, but surely it's better to create something that you can do your work quicker so that you can go and spend time with your grandmother. And I think that might be that person didn't want to spend time with that might be I think that is where the tech becomes beneficial and life-changing, and it's like where we can use it to augment what we've got to do so we get home quicker, so that we can be there to do the other things that we really love with the people that are important to us.
Yeah.
And that we can live our human lives better with the aid of technology.
I love that. I think that's
that
a
will
really
make a
nice
difference to everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice perspective, because I think it can get a bit like, oh God, we're going to welcome the robot overlords, like you say, and they're going to take over and replace us. But yeah, I think thinking about it in terms of, living our human life and being freed up by the technology that's a lovely way of thinking about it.
Yeah, because quite frankly, if a robot wants to do my ironing so I can take my kids to the
Oh
cinema,
my God,
I
yeah.
am so up for the ironing robot.
Yeah, I'm very much here for it. I am one of those that usually depends on the hair straighteners just to do the hem, just to be like, the bits that are showing, this is fine. Amazing.
But I think that's the key to it. I think the power of tech to do good for everybody, from the micro to the macro, but so that it allows us to be better humans.
Yeah,
that will
I
be
love that.
a good feature.
That would definitely be a good feature. That's a much more positive feature than a lot of people paint. So I will take that. We will end on that, because that is a lovely note. I love that. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for bearing with all of my questions. But yeah, thank you so much. And
thank you for having me. It's been so much fun.